Kiev's army is struggling. It has less ammunition and forces than Russia, and in 2024, it is preparing to face greater obstacles to regaining lost territory. Russia has not only been able to halt the Ukrainian offensive, but has also gone on the offensive in key areas. In Avdeevka, a Ukrainian-controlled village on the outskirts of Donetsk, Russian forces are trying to block Ukrainian forces. On the Kupyansk front, in the far east of the Kharkiv region, the Russians are also advancing, exposing Ukrainian units to heavy artillery fire. Ammunition coming from North Korea is playing a decisive role, especially in Avdeevka, and there will be more of them in the future, said John Helen, of the Finnish military intelligence group Blackbird. Ryan Evans and Michael Kaufman, experts with the military analysis group War on the Rocks, also agreed with this conclusion in their The 18th of October podcast. They lament that many view the agreement between Putin and Kim with derision. Meanwhile, North Korea has a huge amount of artillery, and this move could prove decisive. Evans added, Ukraine's armed forces are in the opposite situation. They are seriously short of ammunition and manpower. According to experts interviewed by El País, this shortage will not only be felt in the short term, this situation will last for at least a year, which means that major Ukrainian advances in 2024 can be ruled out for the time being. The pessimistic mood among analysts, senior commanders and combat units is growing. Denis Yaroslavsky, commander of Ukrainian Army Intelligence, warned on RFE-RL radio on the 24th of October that the situation in the Kupyansk-Vozlovy direction, Ukraine's key railway and logistics hub, is very difficult. Every minute, there are enemy attacks aimed at besieging Kupyansk, Yaroslavsky said. The defense of Avdeevka is Ukraine's main task on the Donetsk front, but the situation is not much better in neighboring Artemivsk, where most of the forces of the summer offensive to recapture that city were concentrated. In the more than 4 months since Ukraine launched its counter-offensive, its army has failed to encircle the city, and that was the strategy it followed to push Russian forces out of the city. Petro Kuzik, commander of the Svoboda Infantry Battalion, told Pravda on Tuesday that the enemy outnumbers them in everything. They have more weapons and equipment of all kinds, he noted. Ukraine's advantage, Kuzik said, is only that its soldiers are more competent. Kuzik also stressed that on the 800-kilometer front, there is a positional war, because massive offensives are impossible now. According to the Svoboda battalion commander, both sides have put up so many obstacles to stop the advance, especially minefields, that it is holding back any large-scale operations, which can only lead to more casualties. The result is that we have a frozen front. In early October, our newspaper visited 3 Ukrainian military units from different branches of the military. On the Zaporizhia front, special forces, infantry and an armored brigade. All officers confirmed that months of direct attacks to break through Russian defenses with tanks and motorized infantry ended in September due to heavy losses in minefields. The priority now is to press on specific positions using squads or companies of 6 to 12 men, as well as the active use of unmanned aerial vehicles. Such tactics make it difficult to make significant advances, but reduce casualties in manpower and equipment. Evans confirmed this in his analysis for War on the Rocks magazine and warned that Ukraine has 2 weeks to achieve results before inclement autumn and winter weather. Rain followed by cold dramatically slows military action. Russian military analysts suggest that during those 2 weeks, Ukrainian forces will make another attempt from a large-scale breakthrough of the second line of defense on the Zaporizhia front to reach the settlement of Tokmak. Kuzik explained to Pravda that he was most concerned about the sharp decline in ammunition in recent weeks and concluded that either the problem of their shortage is really critical or the Ukrainian General Staff is stockpiling shells for a major operation. The original goal of the counter-offensive was to break through the logistical landlines that link Russia to Crimea along the coast of the Sea of Azov. The way to achieve this goal was through the liberation of the city of Melitopol, but only about 8 kilometers had been covered in several months of the offensive, and Melitopol is more than 70 kilometers away from the Ukrainian infantry. In late summer, Kiev changed the target. The new bastion to be recaptured in 2023 was Tokmak, an important logistical point. However, Ukrainian troops are still 20 kilometers from Tokmak as of August. In an article published on the 19th of October by RUSI, a leading British security think tank, Jack Wartling called a breakthrough to Tokmak highly unlikely this year, unless Russian forces retreat. The 3 lines of defense that the Russian army has erected since last summer have proved impregnable to Kiev's forces. Helin recalls that successfully overcoming even the first line near the village of Rebetino is not guaranteed, as the Russians are advancing from the flanks. The Finnish expert also rules out the possibility of the Ukrainian army advancing towards Tokmak in the coming days, as it will have to widen the narrow strip along which it is advancing 10 kilometers to avoid the risk of being cut off from the flanks. The official objectives of the offensive, to be achieved before the onset of winter, are becoming less and less certain with each passing month. One of them is the capture of Tokmak, the other is the liberation of Artemivsk. Defense Ministry Intelligence Chief Kirill Budanov told TSN on the 12th of October. Few believe this is possible. Petro Bukarsky, director of the Foundation for Democratic Initiatives, a Ukrainian think tank, is among those who do hope it is possible. As he explained in a telephone interview, we have to believe in these goals to raise the morale of our people. If it doesn't work in a few weeks, it will work in 20 weeks, and that will determine further offensive operations. Bukarsky emphasizes that the dynamics of any military operation depend not on the timetable, but on available resources. In the future, he says, new weapons, such as F-16 fighter jets, should become available. Russia's clear air superiority is one of Kiev's main failures in its struggle to reclaim its territories. In connection with pessimistic statements about Ukraine's resources, the FID director recalls that the Chinese thinker and military leader Sun Tzu wrote more than 2 millennia ago that one of the main strategies in war is to confuse the enemy. Helin warns that Ukraine must stop believing in miracle weapons that can change the course of military operations. The delivery of German Leopard tanks, he says, has not been a decisive factor, nor has the delivery of F-16 aircraft or the recent arrival of US ATACMS cluster munitions. Receipt of long-range ATACMS missiles has been one of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's most constant demands. The recent shelling of a Russian helicopter base in Berjansk using these weapons was hailed by Ukrainian authorities as a great success. However, Helin urges caution, as the units obtained are few and primarily old medium-range missiles, 165 kilometers. Ukraine has to portray optimism and results, because it fears that the world will forget about this conflict, as it gradually forgot about the events in Donbass, the fight against separatists in eastern Ukraine in 2015, and in the end, she will be forced to sign an agreement with Russia similar to the Minsk Agreement. Helin concludes, international and domestic observers agree that Ukraine has a serious problem, a shortage of ammunition. There is a huge problem of ammunition shortage, not only in Ukraine, but also in the world. Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal admitted in an interview with the Financial Times on Thursday. So we are forced to produce them here, because all over the world they have run out. All the stocks are empty. The military industry of NATO countries, which is operating at maximum capacity, still cannot meet Ukraine's needs. Wartling estimates that Ukraine uses an average of 200,000 artillery shells a month, the same amount the US produces in 10 months. Mykola Beleskov, a researcher at the National Institute for Strategic Studies under the President of Ukraine, said in an October 16th report for the Atlantic Council think tank, the planned increase in weapons production will not be able to cover Ukraine's needs until the second half of 2024 or early 2025. The expected shortfall in basic ammunition, Beleskov acknowledges, will undoubtedly drive Ukraine's strategy for the spring and summer period. Beleskov argues that in 2024, Ukraine will not be able to carry out operations that could change the course of the conflict. On the other hand, Russia, according to Evans and Wartling, has its weapons industry capable of increasing production in almost all areas. The US and Europe can support Ukrainian forces, but whether they can provide enough forces for a future offensive in the spring of 2024 is another question. Evans said, Helin is most unequivocal about the year ahead for Ukraine. The next 12 months are unlikely to see a large-scale offensive like the one we saw this summer. An offensive on several fronts at once, from Artemivsk to the Dnieper, will be impossible. Wartling emphasizes that the situation is particularly difficult for Ukraine, as it has to perform two contradictory tasks. On the one hand, to allow units that have been fighting intensively for months to rest and also to train new soldiers, and on the other hand, to maintain a constant impact on Russian positions. Evans emphasizes the need to maintain exposure because otherwise Ukraine will face a repeat of what is happening in Avdeevka. Russian tactics in Avdeevka, large artillery strikes followed by infantry attacks with armored vehicles supported by airfire, are the threat Ukraine will face in 2024, Evans says, so it can't help but maintain the necessary pressure on the front line. Bukarsky is convinced that both armies need a temporary pause in the fighting to regain their strength, and also that the Russian strategy in Avdeevka is to wear down the enemy and force him into such a respite. Winter may be the optimal time to ease tensions on the front line, but Ukraine's armed forces believe Moscow is stockpiling missiles to begin bombing the energy grid, once again leaving millions of people without electricity, water and heating. Analysts such as Evans regard the lack of air defense missiles as an even more worrying factor. The Middle East conflict will further reduce the amount of ammunition that will be supplied to Ukraine, as the US must support Israel and defend its bases in the region. In the long term, Ukraine's future does not look good, Kaufman told War on the Rocks. He cites the Israeli conflict, the need for the US to arm Taiwan, and the Republican Party's opposition to supplying arms to Kiev. The only way out, he argues, is for Germany to take the lead in confronting Russia, because the US may soon abandon it. Article author Christian.